The Venezuela blockade isn't about headlines. This is about leverage. And I've seen this before. And what comes next affects Americans directly. When Washington, D.C. starts tightening the screws like this around Venezuela, it's never just talk. And working Americans always feel it next. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Ben Dykes, retired from the United States Navy. We've got a lot of naval ships down around Venezuela right now, and things are starting to heat up. There's blockades. They are escorting tankers. Venezuela has responded, and I believe what we're going to see next is probably some real interaction between the United States Navy and the Venezuelan Navy. Let me explain why this matters and what to watch for. When I hear people arguing over whether this is a blockade or a quarantine, I can tell immediately who's never spent time around any naval operations, because the label isn't the point. I served in the Navy. I've watched how these situations actually unfold, and what's happening off of Venezuela right now fits a very familiar pattern. This is not about shocking the public. It's not about a declaration of war. This is about leverage, specifically maritime leverage, applied just hard enough to force decisions without lighting the fuse. When you selectively stop oil tankers tied to a regime like Maduro, you're not just enforcing sanctions. You're signaling that the revenue stream keeping that government afloat is now conditional. Oil is Venezuela's oxygen. I will repeat that again. Oil is Venezuela's oxygen. You don't need to fire a shot to change behavior. You just need to control access. And it looks like Venezuela has been doing some dirty work for the Chinese by supplying some transportation of substances to these cartels. And the cartels are doing work for them. I think there's a trade of goods, services, maybe equipment, a little bit of training in there. I've seen this phase before. This is the stage where leadership already knows that escalation is possible, but they're deliberately staying below the threshold. Got a couple of articles here that just came out I want to show you, but that's why you're hearing words like quarantine instead of blockade. It's not spin, it's operational intent. Let's jump right into this. So the first article here, it's out of The Guardian, a UK paper. Another U.S. strike on an alleged drug boat in the Eastern Pacific kills 4 as Donald Trump accuses Venezuela of taking our oil. Now, apparently there was some land deals. There were some drilling deals down in Venezuela that once Maduro took over, those were canceled. Now, they were bought and paid for, and no money was refunded. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, his announcement comes a day after Trump blockades all sanctioned oil tankers entering and leaving Venezuelan space. Now, international waters are 12 nautical miles off the coast. So a United States Navy vessel, by rules of international maritime law, can operate within 12 miles of the coast and vice versa. If a Russian ship wanted to come within 12 miles off the United States coast, it could by international maritime law. Now, where this gets interesting is that the United States military is taking direct action, kinetic. You like to hear that word, kinetic action, against these, quote, fishing boats. And the U.S. military carried out another one in the Eastern Pacific. Wednesday, Hegseth said a lethal kinetic strike on a vessel engaged in narco trafficking had killed 4 people. Apparently, the toll's at 99 right now. The interesting part out of all of this is Venezuela has never come out and denied that the people on these boats are narco cartels. They will not come out and say that. They haven't even so much as acknowledged any of this, which is strange, okay? Now, Trump has put in this blockade on sanctioned Venezuelan oil, and this is going to raise new questions because there's going to be a lot of people that are going to say blockades are a declaration of war. A blockade is a sanction put in place. It's a physical barrier. So you can decide for whatever you want there. But if the United States Navy wanted to take out these ships, it would just be a phone call from Donald Trump or the Secretary of War. By putting an actual blockade in place, it's a physical deterrent. It is telling them you are not going to pass unless we allow you to pass or unless you comply with the rules that we have put in place. Now, you've got this seditious six, and I believe this is where this comes into play. They have tried to come out and drive a wedge, put a bumper in between these ships. It says here, Republicans are largely okay with the campaign. This comes from the AP, which is kind of should be a middle of the road news, site, but they do lean a little left. The president has declared the U.S. is in armed conflict with drug cartels. Donald Trump has not sought out any approval from Congress because he's not in an actual war. They are just deterring, they are destroying these cartel boats. Trump announced the blockade on Tuesday, and here's the interesting part, that the Democrats and the Republicans, neither one will really acknowledge. The U.S. has been imposing sanctions on Venezuela for the last 20 years, but no one was actually carrying through on the sanctions until now, but they have been in place for 20 years. Okay? But now Trump is the bad guy because he's actually taking physical action. Trump's ordering this blockade of sanctioned oil leaving and entering Venezuela. Oil prices apparently have risen over 1%. That's weird because gas prices where I live are down to pre-Joe Biden era. Okay? And I would love to get your opinion on what gas prices are looking like where you live. But they're going to try to, let's say, scare you with this. Now, here's the interesting part as well, that if you haven't looked into this, oil prices rose more than 1% on Asian trade because Venezuela supplies oil, and it sounds weird, to Iran and to some of these Asian countries. And I believe what we're seeing is Donald Trump is trying to push China, trying to push these countries out of our hemisphere. We do not need China 1,500 miles off the coast of our own country dealing with a regime. And anybody that's called a regime is never good for the American people. Now, it's saying here Trump's embargo could put Taiwan at risk. More of a scare tactic because they're going to try to say that China, by them losing some of the oil supply that Venezuela would be supplying, that this is going to put pressure on them to ramp up their long-term goal, some people call it a short-term goal, of taking Taiwan. Donald Trump's decision to impose a partial blockade on Venezuela marks a dramatic escalation. Now that he's ordered this total and complete blockade, it's going to leverage some prices in some of these Asian markets on crude, and they might even start buying oil from the United States, which is what should be happening because we have a surplus. We are energy independent for as long as we want to be. Here's another trending topic over here on X. The U.S. announcement escalates sanctions on the enforcement with about 11 Navy ships, including an aircraft carrier strike group, 280 miles off the coast of Venezuela. And apparently the United States Navy has started conducting flight ops within 35 miles of the Venezuelan coast, which I believe is just a flex. Supporters like Marco Rubio, John Fetterman, while critics call it an illegal act of war, oil prices rose over 1% in the response. The armed forces, now this is funny as well because Maduro is calling on the Colombian army to join forces with Venezuela so no one dares to touch their sovereignty. I don't know if I'm Colombia that I want to get involved in this. I'm probably going to set this one out. And I think it would be the wisest move. I don't think I would want a dictator like Maduro to get my country involved. If I was Colombia, I would kind of, I would sit this one out. Now, Maduro has started using some of his own naval ships to escort these tankers, and I believe that's a little bit of a flex by him, maybe trying to push back and show some level of, I don't know, bravery. There's a thin line between bravery and stupidity, okay? And this isn't spin. This is just operational intent. You apply pressure without forcing the other side into a corner. And I believe that's what Donald Trump is doing. By cutting off their export, cutting off their supply, cutting off their funding, they're going to look for a way around this. He's going to bring them to the negotiating table. Critics are warning this is how wars start. It only starts a war if someone does the wrong thing. This maritime pressure always carries risk, but what tells me this isn't reckless is how targeted this is. This isn't a siege. This isn't civil punishment. This is selective enforcement against these narco boats. This is the kind of move designed to test resolve, not trigger the headlines. What happens next usually goes one of three ways. Either the regime absorbs the hit and looks for an off-ramp, or they probe the perimeter to see how serious we are. They're going to try to test Trump. Or this settles into a long, quiet pressure campaign that goes through the winter, where nothing explodes, but the cost. This matters to Americans because instability in our hemisphere doesn't stay offshore. It shows up in energy prices. Right now, energy prices are low, so I think the administration's doing the right thing. I am starting to hear from members of law enforcement that I'm friends with that the supply of drugs is down. And the way that they know this is the low-level, I would say, punks are not getting arrested because they don't have the money to get into this. And drug prices are actually up, which is increasing the demand. The supply is low, the demand goes up, the price goes up. So you can see this. Now, if you understand naval pressure campaigns, this is going to have a ripple effect just like the ocean. You drop a heavy rock and it's going to cause ripples all across the lake. I'm not here to hype this. I'm not here to downplay this. I'm here to tell you what stage we're in and why that matters. I've seen how these campaigns unfold, and the headlines always lag reality. If this situation changes, you'll hear it here, calmly, clearly, and without the noise. Stick around. I'll walk you through what to watch next. Subscribe if you want context, not theatrical noise. This is the Ben Dyke Show. I'll see you in the future.